This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. The New York Yankees, the most storied, loved and loathed sports team ever. The evil empire and the damn Yankees. The Bronx Bombers, Murderers Row, winner of 40 pennants and 27 World Series, whose fans captured tyrants. The Yankees, Roger Peckinpah, Angel Aragon, and Urban Shocker. From the 1903 Highlanders to the 2011 playoff busts, former Yankees public relations director Marty Appel tells the story of the Pinstripe Empire, the New York Yankees from before the Babe to after the Boss, in his just-released history. Marty served as PR director of the Yankees from 1973 to 1977, and after the Yanks, Marty joined the staff of Baseball Commissioner Bowie Kuhn, later as executive producer at WPIX from 1968 to 1992. He won Emmys for his Yankee telecast. He has written 18 books, including some ghostwritten. His biography of Thurman Munson was a New York Times bestseller. Welcome, Marty.
Great to be here. Thank you, Doug.
Great read, great pleasure, great reviews. Let me just read a couple. A Yankee home run, important and riveting. New standard for New York Yankee books, riveting and comprehensive. Sunday's New York Times book review, June 3rd, Jim Bouton, no less, says, written an insider's history enlivened by a rich store of carefully researched anecdotes, most of which I'd never heard before. Likewise, me, I'm a Yankee fan, 665. This stuff is delicious.
Thank you.
But this is more than a baseball book. It's more than a Yankee book. It's really lots of different books. It's a history of New York. I mean, you've got some early colorful characters, which we'll talk about. And it's a politics book. It's a social history book. The thing that strikes me about the Yankees is Muammar Gaddafi gets captured. Who's his capturer? He's wearing a Yankee cap. So you chronicle it going from this business of, a couple of really unsavory, unscrupulous New York characters to this international brand. Why? Why the Yankees?
It's interesting because if the founders of the Yankees, Frank Farrell and Bill Devery, had given any thought to branding and merchandising outside of their little area in Washington Heights, they never would have called them the Yankees, because that was a bad word at the turn of the century. That was only for Northerners. There were enough Confederate veterans still living.
Sure, 1903.
Would have been very offended by that name.
But why the Yankees then?
It was a patriotic sounding name, Yankee Doodle Dandy and all of that, and they tried to envelop themselves in the rising patriotism that America was feeling.
It had nothing to do with editors trying to fit the word Highlanders into a headline?
Well, it had everything to do with that, because Highlanders didn't work. Newspapers hated it. New York Times didn't even refer to the team as Highlanders until like their third or fourth season. Nicknames weren't that important back then anyway. They were essentially the New York Americans, the answer to the New York Nationals, which was the Giants. And Yankees didn't become an official nickname until they moved out of the Highland area of Washington Heights and into the Polo Grounds in 1913.
Which they shared with the Giants.
Yes.
Okay. You don't open the book, and you could have opened it with any number of things, with Reggie Jackson's 4 consecutive home runs, with Babe calling the shot against the Cubs. You start with the groundskeeper. Why?
Well, first I thought it was cool that I found the groundskeeper's name. I mean, talk about an obscure fact. And then
And his name was?
Schenk.
Go ahead.
And I knew immediately that I would start and end with the groundskeeper then and now, because one thing that's continuous is the beauty of the field and the maintenance of a high-level field, and the fact that fans would go there for an escape from the sidewalks of New York.
One of the things that struck me, having been a kid who grew up in Queens in the 50s and 60s and went to doubleheaders constantly at Yankee Stadium in the nosebleed seats in the upper right field deck, was the beauty of it. And you talk about the early stadium overlooking the Palisades in New Jersey, so it really was a pastoral game. It was a relief from the hutter and clutter and bustle and grime of the city.
Well, people tend to think of it now as a ramshackle, rickety old wooden ballpark whose best attribute was that it didn't burn down in the 10 years it was used. But actually, it was a lovely place to spend a late afternoon and watch the sunset over the Palisades, and it was just a great experience to find baseball becoming so important in New York.
Growing up as a kid, when you went to the stadium, it didn't have all the hubbub that the modern stadium has. The races, the activities, the noise, the music. So in between innings, when there's a lot of thinking going on and what's going to happen, or there's a pitching change, it's all this noise and stuff. It takes away. I mean, I'm getting old. It takes away from the game. No?
Well, it depends on your age. Young people find it just part of the entertainment and part of the experience. They have a staff of about 24 now that just do in-game entertainment. When I started working there in 1968, that was about the size of the whole front office.
So it dramatically changed in terms of its outreach, its marketing, its branding, its economic purposes.
It's true, and even the little thing that does appeal to older fans, which is the Sinatra music of New York, New York. When you're walking out after a victory and that music is playing, it's just one of those feel-good moments.
Oh, yeah. I mean, come on. I mean, walking out whenever whenever they've won. Talk about, is baseball more of a business now? I mean, you hear that, it's becoming much more of a business. You probably heard it since the early teens.
It was always said, even, in the 19-teens, Frank Chance got a contract to manage the club.
Of Tinkers to Evers, too?
That guy. And he got $25,000 a year to manage this team, way more than the highest paid players get. And there were people saying, baseball's just become a business now.
Oh, really? Okay, so the more things change, the more they don't.
Right.
Okay, let's turn a little bit from baseball to you for a moment. You end baseball. How did you become the PR head of the New York Yankees during this tremendous transition?
Well, it begins with my writing a letter to Bob Fischel in 1967, and he was the legendary PR director of the team for many years. And I was a college kid looking for a summer job. And he knew that the unanswered Mickey Mantle fan mail was a problem, that everybody who didn't get a response was a potential Mets fan.
Uh-oh. God.
So he was able to convince the powers that be to hire a kid for the summer to catch up on all the Mantle fan mail, and that was my first job. Now, I thought 1,000 people were writing to him a day for a summer job, but in the late 60s, young people were not being drawn to baseball, and my letter was like a breath of fresh air to him. So I got hired. I formed a friendship with Mickey Mantle out of it. How good was that? And when CBS sold the team to the Steinbrenner Group a few years later, I was no longer the fan mail kid. I was seen as an inherited young executive, and George Steinbrenner that made me at 24 the PR director of the team when Bob Fischel left.
And what's your reaction? What's the story?
You know what? Obviously, I was thrilled, but I also felt ready for it because I'd been trained by Bob Fischel, who was the best there was. And that training, plus my own encyclopedic baseball knowledge starting from 1955, made me feel like this is natural. I'm the right guy for this.
Talk a little bit about your history as a fan.
Well, I was born in Brooklyn, and my first memory was the Dodgers winning the 1955 World Series.
Awful day in my life.
Well, people were celebrating in the streets.
I know, my mother.
And at
yeah.
my young age, I felt bad for the Yankees that they had lost. And I decided I was going to take up the cause of the underdog, and I was going to root for
The
the
hated,
Little did I
lordly,
know.
mean, come on.
So my whole life has been a mistake. I wasn't supposed to be a Yankees
Right,
fan.
I mean, what's the story here? So you become the PR director under the Steinbrenners. What did you do? Give me some high points, some moments where you just said, wow, did I pull this one off? And then the other one is, oh, shit, man, this can't be happening to me.
Well, it was an interesting time because it was also an interesting time for the media, because in the wake of the Woodward and Bernstein's accomplishments with Watergate, even the sports media was feeling like we're no longer just going to follow the dictates of the Yankee PR machine and write what's in the daily press notes.
Sure.
We're going to go get our own stories. And so this was happening at the time that there was a burgeoning player movement and free agency was in the wind. And so on my watch, it really changed from the PR department dictating the news of the day to the media saying, we'll determine what's the news of the day.
Wow.
And so we were really being reactive starting at that point to this day.
Talk about it. I mean, give me the most blood-curdling day as a PR.
Well, that would have to be in 1973 when our two pitchers, Fritz Peterson and Mike Kekich, traded families, traded wives and kids and dogs and homes and cars. And talk about reactive. I mean, we didn't make that announcement. They did on their own.
Right, I remember.
And I was just not skilled or schooled even by Bob Fischel to deal with teammates trading wives. So,
and dogs and houses and everything else.
that was a rough one.
I would think so. What about the other side? One that you just said, yes.
Well, I think bringing George Steinbrenner into the market, we didn't realize at the time that he was going to become this national celebrity, parodied on Seinfeld and hosting Saturday Night Live.
The star, the boss.
But we knew things were changing because we knew this guy had an incredible will to win and also a gift for knowing how to manipulate the press and make sure he got the back page every day. So in that sense, he became like the chief publicist as well as the chief, the principal owner of the team.
You're in a very interesting time. I mean, the Yankees are coming out of their decade-long doldrums, I guess from 65 to 75, and they're starting to put together a team. But as you said, the game itself is evolving, and in some cases, it's being overthrown by court decisions. So you've got free agency, you've got Catfish Hunter, you've got all of these things going on at the same time. So not only is the media changing, but the game's changing.
Game is changing, and it was perfect for George Steinbrenner, who didn't buy into the free agency system. He bought into the traditional system and didn't see this coming at all. But when it did arrive, he was there with very deep pockets because of being in the New York market, and he was able to take advantage throughout his entire ownership of going for the glamour players.
Okay. Why write the book and why write it now? What led you to write this book?
You'd think this would be a book that I'd always wanted to do, but yet it wasn't until 2010 when I came to the sudden realization that there hadn't been a narrative Yankee history in almost 70 years since Frank Graham of the New York Journal had done one. There have been some beautiful coffee table photo-driven books, but not a narrative history.
Or books about a particular season or a group of players.
Or the stadium.
Or the stadium itself, but not one narrative.
Right. Now, it was a daunting task because, first of all, how do you keep it to 620 pages, which was a trick in itself. And then the fun of being a historian is determining what makes it and what doesn't, what's history and what isn't. So it was a very exciting project just to determine what are the events that make it, who are the personalities you want to focus on and maybe call attention to a little more. And the first half of the book a lot of it was new to me. And I knew how to do the research. I knew where to find what I needed. But starting in 1955, when I became a fan, it was like, I know all this stuff.
Well, again, in fact, the same thing as a reader. My first recollection of a Yankee Stadium is also 1955. is that the first part, really, I took my time. I was really, writing stuff all over. But then you could look at my notes as when we pass 55, there's less comment because the stuff. Some wow moments as an historian. You're sitting or viewing, you're doing something, and all of a sudden it's like, wow.
Well, you'd find little things that I knew the readers would get a kick out of. For instance, the early Highlanders, their uniforms had an N and a Y separate on the jersey. And it turned out that they would signal to each other, the players, no or yes by tapping the jersey for hit and run plays. And that was beautiful. Or that Wee Willie Keeler, their star right fielder, had to stand on planks of wood up at Hilltop Park because the place was just a big soup. It was just a mud bath. And so they didn't do any bother with scouting on where the guys would hit the ball. He had to stand on the wood planks.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, the opening writing about Schenk talks about that there's not a level place in the entire field. And then you talk about, as it being a multifaceted history, the various machinations about where the stadium is going to be built, who's getting paid off, who's the construction company. I mean, it's, there's at least a novel here.
The interesting thing was it was important and it wasn't important. College football was still the number one sport in America at that time. And the Giants had made an impact in New York, so pro baseball was sort of on the map. But this new New York team starting in 1903, it's even amazing that Tammany Hall cared. Mostly with the Giants being very influential, the extent of the caring was to shove them as far north as they could on the island of Manhattan so that you couldn't even get there by subway and they would be a non-factor.
So money always plays into this. As you wrote the book, who were a couple of the old-timers that you would have loved to have interviewed, met personally?
Well, I think one of the accomplishments of the book is that the reader comes to know Jacob Ruppert better.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I want to go talk a little bit more about him. Well, why don't you do it now?
He's largely forgotten. I mean, there's the Ruppert housing projects on the Upper East Side, and there's a Ruppert Place by Yankee Stadium. But you ask most fans today, and they don't know who Jacob Ruppert is, and he owned the team from 1915 to 1939. He had a co-owner in the first years. Now, he was Da Vinci, because if George Steinbrenner liked to talk about buying the Yankees is like buying the Mona Lisa, well, Jacob Ruppert was Da Vinci then, because he created, he bought Babe Ruth, he built Yankee Stadium, he created the Yankee dynasty. And he was a benevolent sportsman. He was a very wealthy American, but yet throughout the 20s he had to deal with Prohibition, and he was a brewer, and throughout the 30s he had to deal with the Depression, so the industry wasn't growing.
Right.
But he put all his money back into the team and disposed of a lot of his other interests in order to keep the Yankees vibrant and important. And he was what you'd want in an owner, a guy that turned over the field decisions to Ed Barrow, his general manager, and who just enjoyed being this rich sportsman owning this great franchise.
Yeah, and what I found intriguing was his political background. Elected to Congress a couple of times.
4 times, yeah.
From the 15th Congressional District, which is now Charlie Rangel's district. And the connection with Tammany politics. One of the less admirable periods in, I guess, Yankee history is the time of its failure to integrate the team. Clearly, the Dodgers integrated in 47. They brought in players like Newcomb and Campanella, who were playing. The Yankees don't do it until, 56 with Elston?
55.
55 with Elston. Why so slow?
Well, why so slow is like, why were they all so slow? They were all basically afraid that if they integrated the team, their audience might go away.
Yeah, but they had experience. I mean, the Dodgers had done it 8 years before.
The other factor is that the Yankees were winning every year.
Okay.
So they didn't feel any compelling need to shake things up. So it's not
in terms
just
of talent.
Right, and it's not just a coincidence that they finally lose in 1954, the year that the damn Yankees was done.
Right.
So then in 55, they finally integrate the team. Now the Yankees were never an enlightened team in terms of being the first at things. They were slow to broadcast, they were slow to play night games, and they were slow to integrate. They weren't a leader in that sense.
Who was?
Well, Larry McPhail certainly was.
Right, okay.
But he wasn't fast on integration. He was one of the one-third owner of the Yankees starting in 1945, but he didn't move that movement forward at all.
Game you'd like to see?
Well, probably Babe Ruth's called shot home run in 1932, because it remains a fascinating debate to this day as to whether he did indeed point to the bleachers in Wrigley
Well,
Field.
you've seen the stories and you've seen the film, in fact.
Well, it turned out in the 1970s, some guy emerged with a home movie of the
Right,
actual
the
thing.
Zapruder film of baseball.
So, I mean, it would be like saying, by the way, we have some photos of Booth shooting Lincoln. And, you know,
Right, in my attic, right.
but it was disappointing in the end because it shows him pointing, but it doesn't really answer the question as to whether he was pointing at the bleachers or what he was really doing.
So you've read it, and there's no definitive answer, did
Everybody on the field that day disagrees with what happened, but Babe was a smart enough marketer.
Ah.
To say, oh, of course I did.
Okay. Looking at the modern team, and we had talked about the team earlier, and my comment was, I hope this wasn't the 65 Yankees where you have all these sort of aging players. What's unique about this team, the current team? And, you know, you probably, you know, what are your favorite Yankee teams from 1955 on? Forget about the 29 and 39 or 27 and 39.
All right. Well, I love the 61 team. What a great summer that was with Mantle and Maris chasing the record. But baseball was so primitive in its marketing, they didn't even know what they had. And the decision to say you have to do it in 154 games was the dumbest decision that baseball could have made.
Because everybody snoozed out.
Yeah, so the last 8 games were like meaningless when in fact they were historic.
And the attendance was really low at these games.
Because baseball didn't know what they had and how to market it.
And then compare it to the circus, what was it, in 98 with McGuire and Sosa?
At least baseball knew what they were doing then, and everybody's attention was turned to them.
Yeah, and then the opposite is that Maris wasn't juiced and these two guys were taking steroids.
Ford Frick was the commissioner of baseball. He'd been a ghostwriter for Babe Ruth. And in those days, the powers that be in baseball felt the preservation of the great records and the great names was more important than marketing the modern product. So,
and this was a conscious decision on their part, or they just didn't know?
No, it was a conscious decision.
Okay.
Now, in fairness, it was the first year of an expanded schedule, and they thought every record is going to fall.
And the expanded schedule was due to the fact that they actually physically expanded the number of teams in the league.
They added 2 teams.
Okay.
But they thought the whole record book is going to go out the window now. These extra 8 games will ruin everything, and all the old-time players will be forgotten. So they bent over backwards, and it turned out it wasn't the case at all.
What do you do with the juiced players of the modern era?
Eventually,
the Bonses, the McGuires.
You know, I think it's going to take a generation, and then a whole new group of sports writers will come in, and they'll become influential thinkers. And somebody will say, you know what, they were the best player of their era. They weren't trying to throw games. They were trying to play better. We're going to have to accept it and live with it. I think that's what's going to happen.
Bonds, yeah, but I think you have to do it on an individual basis. Bonds, yes, because Bonds was a superstar to begin with. Rodriguez, probably the same thing. But Mark McGuire, he was terrible first baseman. You know, come on, he was nothing before he juiced.
It was what it was. This is what you were dealt.
Okay.
This was the era, and somebody eventually is just going to say, these were the best players of their time. We can't ignore them.
Okay. All-time Yankee team by position.
Well, this becomes interesting because you get the current fan really able to see a lot of the best ever at one time today. Because to me, it's Gehrig, of course, at first base.
Right.
But then the other 3 infielders are all the current guys. Cano, of course, his career's got to play out.
But he's potential.
Potential.
But better than Bobby Richardson, I guess.
Yeah, well, there's 2 Yankee second basemen in the Hall of Fame, Lazzari and Gordon.
Right.
So, in fairness, it's still Lazzari in my mind, but Cano's on his way.
Okay.
Jeter and A-Rod. A-Rod's won 2 MVP awards there. No other Yankee third baseman ever did that. So it's A-Rod. shuffle Ruth Gehrig and DiMaggio, Ruth Mantle and DiMaggio in the outfield, and clearly that's your outfield.
And then you have Rivera.
Rivera's the closer, of course, the best ever in the game.
So we're lucky in a sense that we've got 4 players playing right now that are going to be Hall of Fame players.
And you could, you know, Mariano's maybe done now. We
Right,
don't know. We
right.
hope he comes back. But essentially, you could take a photograph of the second baseman, the shortstop, the third baseman, and Rivera all at the same time. But let's finish it just for the sake of argument. Berra and Dickey are the catchers.
Yeah.
Yogi gets a little edge because he won so many pennants.
Right.
And Ruffing and Ford would be the righty and the lefty starters.
Wow. Last question. Going to the game. Do you enjoy the game as much, just as the pure artistry of the game, as you once did?
I do. I enjoy the strategy of the game, and I enjoy the experience of being in this majestic Yankee Stadium, because even though it's a different ballpark, they accomplished their number one thing, which was make it feel like you're in Yankee Stadium, and they got that done.
They did, in your mind.
They absolutely
So
did.
they were successful then, at least from an economic, aesthetic, and I guess baseball point of view, with the new stadium?
Yeah, aesthetically, you want to feel the majesty of all that history there, and you do. You sit there and you watch the game and you go, this is the top of the heap for Major League Baseball.
Nice, nice. You're coming back in September after this pennant race is over, or after the World Series? You choose.
World Series isn't easy. 13 teams to beat in your league, 3 rounds of playoffs.
Tough.
That's what made Joe Torre so good. He
Tough.
did that when Stengel, McCarthy, and Huggins never had to face that challenge.
Yeah, no, it's really a different game structurally. Good, thank you. My thanks to Marty Appel for being on the show. Join us next week when my colleague Ronnie Eldridge and I talk with renowned political advisors and analysts Bob Schrum and Ed Rollins here on CUNY TV. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.